You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 289 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's going, Jeremy. It's an exciting night of Major League Baseball drafting, which is, I guess, the most boring draft in sports, but yet one that is of great interest to us Cubs fans.
We'll touch on the draft, but we will not dive into the entire thing and have actual real hard-hitting questions. We'll save that for the folks that do all the watching of high school players and all that stuff. That's not us, and that's not our guest tonight. We will circle back to that next week. We will touch on the news coming out of the draft. We will touch on the week that was, preview the week that will be for the Cubs. And to help us break down all the happenings with the Cubs, we've got returning to the podcast, friend of the show, Andy Dolan. You know him from pointlessexercise.com, his newsletter there, decepio.com. Andy, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So we'll start with the draft because that is the that's what's happening tonight. There is some news coming out of the draft because the Cubs made a pick that surprised folks. The Cubs selecting the Cubs are taking a pitcher. Pat, would you call this? Was this an underslot for Mr. Horton?
So. Cade Horton is the pick. We'll see if he's an underslot. He was not projected necessarily to go to the Cubs at number 7. Let's hope he's an underslot because that would mean they could get someone meaningful later in the draft. Although I do have to say,
there wasn't anybody meaningful at that pick in the draft.
Yeah,
number 7.
I'm not a big fan of doing the underslot game when you draft 7th overall. I think if you're drafting 7th, you should get the 7th best player in the draft, right? Or possibly even better than 7th, depending on who is drafted ahead of you. I think underslotting and all that other stuff, that's great if you're drafting like 23rd or something and you've got some strategy, but I would have liked the Cubs to get what was the 7th best player in the draft, and maybe they feel they have and they've outsmarted the entire baseball community. That could be true, but I guess we'll find out in like 5 years.
Yeah, Andy, the 7th overall pick, your thoughts on what the heck they're doing and how they're allocating their $10.5 million in this draft so far.
Well, they took the highest rated Cade that I had on my draft board.
Nice.
So that's important.
Cade McNown no longer on your draft board.
He was 1A.
1A.
1B? 1A. I guess 1A would be the first. He's 1B. Yeah, I mean, I watched the draft live. I've actually been writing it up for the newsletter, and mostly just to make fun of Harold Reynolds on the MLB network coverage. So I was shocked because I had done extensive research into all these picks for a good 8 or 10 minutes before the draft started. And he wasn't on my list, I tell you, of the top 7 guys they could take. A couple of things, as soon as the pick was made, because, you know, all the prospect perverts have to immediately backtrack because, no, the Cubs are there. That's great. They're doing a great job. So not that he's not a prospect pervert, but John Greenberg pointed out that Keith Law in his last mock draft had Horton going 10th. So just 3 picks after. So maybe not a huge overdraft by the Cubs, except if you read what Keith wrote, he basically wrote, he's only got 2 pitches. If he can add a third, he might have like 2nd round value. If he doesn't, he's probably a middle reliever who you should pick in the 3rd to the 5th round. So
yeah,
Keith
he's got a fastball and a slider, right?
Yeah,
and that's it.
Right. So Keith was basically picking. All right, here's the Rockies at 10. They're morons. Who are they going to take? They'll probably take Caleb. They'll probably take Cade Horton. But here's where he should go. But then somebody else pointed out, okay, so if they're drafting him with the idea that they don't have to pay him the full slot and they're going to use it later, the time they did it that it seemed to work the best was when they drafted Kyle Schwarber And then they were able to later draft Dylan Cease and Justin Steele. And it's really convenient to look back at it and pick two guys who worked out and go, oh, they wouldn't have gotten those guys without you. You don't really, how do you really know that? I mean, they picked them. They might have been able to sign them for less. So we do a lot of reverse engineering. That's all you can really do, though, right? On the MLB draft is reverse engineer it, because hardly anybody's seen any of these guys play.
Exactly.
So you just have to take everybody's word for it, which is why I just think it's. I enjoy watching it as a spectacle. I don't know if you guys watch the draft. They're doing it in a band shell in Los Angeles for some reason, and they're trying to make it feel like the NFL, the NBA draft. They were like interviewing players before about what they were wearing, and Termarr Johnson, the guy that the Pirates took at fourth, another incredible steal of the draft, Termarr Johnson, except for every other pick was also the steal of the draft. He gave an explanation of everything he was wearing, including his Donald Trump tie. Like, okay, great. Termarr, he probably rocketed up the Cub draft board
for sure. Yeah.
Like, oh, I can't believe we can't get him. So
the thought of the presentation of the MLB draft of like, yeah, here's a bunch of like, you can do that with the NFL draft because people watch college football. Like those are people that people know. NBA draft, people know who these players are.
There's a good chance in the NBA draft that at least the American players, the half the players drafted who are American, you've actually seen them on a basketball court shooting a basketball.
Yeah, some of them just a few months before had screwed up your NCAA tournament bracket.
Yeah.
So you know who those guys are.
Yeah.
With hockey, it's the same. It's the same. It's a little. You do have kind of the World Juniors and some other stuff if you go out of your way to see it. But really, baseball and hockey drafts are pretty much just YouTube videos. Is all you can see. Clips on YouTube of these guys. That's about it. And scouting reports.
Well, and they're even getting more like comparable because as Sam Fells pointed out, like the Montreal Canadiens for years just like drafted sons of former NHL players.
Yes.
Like that was their strategy for a while. It's like, yeah, I remember some scout, I scouted his dad. He must be good too. And so, we had Matt Holliday's kid go, Andrew Jones's kid went, even Eric Green, who played tight end for the Steelers, like his kid was getting picked. It was like, if you just have a famous dad, chances are you're going in the top 20 tonight. So it's very exciting. A lot of in-depth thought going into these picks. Can I tell you my favorite thing that Harold Reynolds said?
Please do. Yeah,
he was talking about another son of a big leaguer, Carl Crawford's son, Justin. He was talking about his speed, and Harold said, quote, he has a uniqueness that we don't see very often.
In regards to speed.
Well, it's a uniqueness that we don't see very often. I mean, this thing is so unique, you hardly ever see it. Harold, I don't think you know what unique means. But
the uniqueness of the MLB draft we will break down next week. We'll figure out what the heck happened, what went down.
You guys got to break down picks one. All it's only 20 rounds now, right? They cut it off.
So 20 picks.
You can't draft Mark Grace or Mike Piazza anymore because the draft ends before. But see, that's the other thing, right? That's brilliant for the Cubs. The prospect perverts are like, anybody the Cubs sign the day, like as soon as the draft ends, you sign a bunch of guys, right? Like, these guys were all in my top 300.
That guy would have been my 17th round pick. That's a steal.
What a steal for the Cubs.
Yeah.
And then we'll judge the success of this draft 5 years from now, when any of the players make it to the MLB roster.
Judge it when we can compare it to whoever the new president of baseball operations and the new general manager are.
Yes, as we start our next rebuild. Look forward.
I'm going to make a prediction that the Cubs have a more successful draft this weekend than they did in the year 2010.
Okay. What happened in 2010?
I know who that was.
Hayden Simpson, of course, the 16th pick overall, followed by Reggie Golden, Micah Gibbs, Hunter Ackerman. I guess Matt Caesar was the steal of the draft for the Cubs.
That's great. Matt Caesar, whose underwear and his bat made a bigger contribution to the 2016 World Series than his actual play did. Remember Addison wore his underwear and Rizzo used his bat in Los Angeles because they were to stop getting shut out.
The Cubs ended up that year. If you take all the draft picks they had that year and you looked at their lifetime Major League Baseball WAR, it was less than 0. It was like -4. So, yeah.
Megan Montemurro looked up the other 2 times the Cubs drafted 7th ever. There's a couple of classics. It was 74 and 76. 74 was Scott Thompson, Scott with 1 T.
Oh, sure.
And 76 was pitcher Herman Segelke. The 2 of them combined to play 629 games. 626 of those were Scott Thompson, and a combined WAR of -5.8.
Scott Thompson hit a grand slam once, though. So
he finished 3rd in the Rookie of the Year voting.
Yes,
in 1979.
Yeah. But yeah, no. So I mean, there's nowhere to go but up. So let's do that. Let's go up.
Sounds good. The Cubs started, hopefully, changing their trajectory more towards up after a rough week. After the series in LA, we had we saw the Cubs lose 4 games in LA. We were
Jeremy,
so
can
disgusted.
we set the table? Can we set the table for this? The Cubs won 4 consecutive series, 2-1. They were on an 8-4 run. People were saying, this team's not so bad. They might get close to 500.
They're watchable. You can watch this team.
And then they went to Los Angeles.
They went to Los Angeles.
Plus 4 in a row, thereby negating the previous 12 games.
No, we canceled the podcast last week because there's nothing to talk about. We're like, why bother? We're not doing it. Shut it down.
Our lives, plural, turned out to be more important than what the Cubs are doing.
We had no interest in discussing anything that happened in Los Angeles. This was unwatchable. No thanks. And then it got worse. It got worse because Baltimore came to town, and I went to one of those games.
I did too. It's funny. We suffered through that, didn't we?
So I went to the 7-1 loss on the Wednesday. Just awful. Justin Steele coming back from having a baby doesn't have a great outing, and the Cubs got lost to Baltimore. And the only takeaway I really have from that Baltimore series is how shocking it was of how many Baltimore fans were in attendance at that series. I'm like, you watch a game in Baltimore and nobody's there. Like, it's an empty ballpark, or it's a bunch of Cubs fans when the Cubs are there. But here, a ton of Baltimore fans. Andy, were you surprised at how many Baltimore fans were in attendance?
I'm kind of surprised right now when anybody goes to a Cub game.
There you go.
Orioles or Cubs or Mets fans or anybody. But as I'm sure Tom Ricketts would point out, those people they're paying full price, so it's working out fine.
Yeah.
As somebody who works with a lot of people in the DC, Baltimore metropolitan area, I can tell you this was the family vacation for many people. So if you want to talk about levels of patheticism, they come to Chicago, which is a good town to come to in the summer, and the Orioles only come here once every 9 years or whatever. So it makes sense that people would come out to see their team against the Cubs, and the Orioles are actually not god awfully bad like they have.
No, they were on a 9-game win streak there when they came to town. So that series. A quick 2-game ass kicking at the hands of Baltimore, and then the New York Mets came to town, and the Cubs proceeded to continue the losing streak as they dropped both games, the doubleheader on Saturday, and so first they lost 8-0 on the Thursday game, then had a doubleheader on Saturday, dropped both those games in extra innings. The Cubs unable to get the Manfred man home, Andy.
Hey, good. We're up to at least now. So the Boog and JD use that. I got Wayne Randazzo to use it on the Mets broadcast, and somebody told me that Michael Kay has used it on the Yankees broadcast. So
love it.
Only 27 teams to go. I mean, the automatic runner, I think, is what a lot of people refer to it as, which is better to me than when they call it the ghost runner, which is just wrong. Because there's a person there. It's not a ghost, it's not an imaginary runner. It's a real guy. Although it would be kind of fun if they did use a ghost runner. And you just
Wouldn't
had to
hurt the Cubs any.
You just had to like imagine how, it's like, okay, who is the ghost runner? It's like, okay, it's Frank Schwindel. Oh, it's the ghost runner has been picked off.
Juan Pierre. Did you find that a little frustrating? I actually watched the second game for reasons that are completely unclear, and Saturday night of all things. And in the top of the 10th inning, with 2 outs, the Cubs decided that the best idea would be to try to pick a runner off second base.
They did.
By throwing the ball into center field and allowing an extra run to come home, giving the Mets a 2-run lead. And then, of course, we knew this was going to happen.
You knew that was going to happen. That was going to count. Yeah.
The Cubs scored a run, thanks to Mr. Morel. But then when the Cubs loaded up the bases, and some people were complaining, oh, Suzuki should have tried to steal second base because then they were going to walk Horner. And it's like, well, it's not a bad idea, I guess, to have second and third and 1 out in Major League Baseball when you need 1 run to tie and 2 to win. But in any event, Schwarber comes up with the bases loaded and manages to do the one thing that would end the game without a run being scored, which is hit a 1-bouncer straight to the third baseman who could step on third and then throw to first. And poor Christian Morel crosses the plate thinking he's scored the tying run, only to turn around and realize the disaster that has fallen behind him. He's a rookie. That's what we call a rookie mistake, I guess, right? To think that you're crossing the plate on a chopper in the infield with 1 out would mean that your team has tied the game, but in fact that was not the case.
Yeah, just a tough back-to-back 2 games there. Andy, I know you had some thoughts on the return of Seiya Suzuki so far. What do you think about how Seiya's been so far since returning from injury?
Well, when he left, I think he was there when he got hurt, and I admitted on the podcast, or maybe it was in the news, I forget. But I kind of forgot that we had him. He was gone so long and the team was so bad that when they said, when is Seiya going to come back? And when he had only the Cubs would have the jammed finger that's just fine. It'd be day to day. That takes 6 weeks to actually heal. So when he left, he was like the only good player. Now he's like 1 of 3, which is a bonus. There's Nico and depending on how much you like Christopher Morel. I love Seiya. He's by far my favorite Cub, and I'm so glad to see him back. And somebody's playing, he's not hitting any home runs. He's slugging over 540 since he came back. And the one skill Seiya has is he can hit the ball to the farthest part of the park. It's the only part of the park that it's not a home run. He's really good at it. He's done it like 3 or 4 times where he's hit like high on the wall in the farthest part of whatever park he's in. So it's just a double and not a home run. But very happy to have Seiya back.
Yeah, and I mean, he's one of the reasons to watch. There's not a lot, and he's definitely one you want to see.
Well, I mean, you could see, but the Cubs, you could see history, right? I mean, Michael Givens, right, was the first player in Major League history to lose both ends of a doubleheader without giving up an earned run. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Frank nearly hit into 3 double plays in a row. He hit into the one you talked about to end the second game of the doubleheader. Then he hit into one to start to kill a rally in his first at bat today, and then would have hit into another one, but Eduardo Escobar completely kicked the ball around the infield, and it ended up being just an error, fielder's choice. But
I'm hearing he plans to hit 3 in an inning at some point. That's set an all-time record.
Honestly, the hardest part, the only thing keeping Frank from hitting into more double plays is the inability of the Cubs to consistently ever get on base in front of him. Otherwise, he could handle that. No, he could make a run at Albert Pujols is the all-time leader in Major League history in grounding into double plays. It's not even close. Frank, in just a season and a half, if he had somebody consistently getting out in front of him, could shatter that record, I think.
I had to laugh when David Ross was tossed, and then I was ready for him to get tossed again. And I'm like, David Ross this is a smart guy. He's not going to be here for the whole doubleheader. He's not going to watch 18 innings of this. Well done, David Ross. But if the Cubs were able to win on the Sunday, they were able to snap the losing streak. If they had lost today, friend of the show, Matt Trueblood, tweeted out earlier today that if the Cubs had lost today's game, In the 150-year history of the Cubs, they would have had 4 10-game losing streaks under David Ross out of 20 ever in the history of the team. So
that includes that Herman Franks era and Jim Marshall and Lee Elia and a lot of others too. That's pretty impressive.
Ross very nearly was the first manager in baseball history to have 3 double-digit losing streaks last year. They had that horrible stretch late in the season where they lost like 15 out of 16, but they somehow won like game number 8, and so it broke it up just enough.
So answer this for us if you can, Andrew. Give us your take on this. So there are kind of 3 schools of thought on Ross. One is, this is a dumpster fire. It's not his fault. You can't hold him accountable for it. The other is, yeah, but he still sucks and they shouldn't be losing this much. And then the third is, let's just wait and see. It's hard to tell, really. It's so bad with the talent they have, whether they're good or not. Let's, you need to see him with a decent enough team in order to really judge. Where do you come down on that?
I think it's, is there door number 4? I think it's, you shouldn't expect him to be able to win very much with this team, but he still does enough like weird stuff that you're very concerned that he's just bad at it. Lineup construction is terrible. Saying that he plays, he's going to continue to play Jason Hayward because he loves him. It's like, I don't. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to win?
Bad.
Are you trying? If the idea is, which everybody has come to terms with, this team is bad, and it was bad. It was put together bad, and it was going to be bad. Then what you're really doing is you should be filtering through players. Basically, you're panhandling. You're sifting through the river, trying to see if you could find a gold nugget. And you learned long ago that Jason Hayward was just a big useless rock, and there's just no sense in throwing that back in the pan over and over again. It seemed to take him like a really long time to move Christopher Morel down in the lineup when he started to struggle.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, and when he was striking out, he struck out like 24 times in 50 at bats or something. And it's like, look, sending him to Iowa is not going to do him any good. He needs to be up here, but just move him down. And he just wouldn't do it. And then he did it, and Morel like immediately was good again. Like it really did the thing they wanted to do. It took pressure off him, and he just went back to playing. And it's like, this is the stuff you're supposed to be good at. And then the thing that I always thought was crap, and it's turned out to be crap, was when they didn't fire Joe, they didn't re-sign Joe. But when your manager wants to come back and you tell him you don't want him back, you've effectively fired him.
Yeah.
The idea was, well, Joe, the clubhouse was just way too relaxed, and we need somebody to get in there and just light a fire under him. And Rossi did that as a player, and he's going to do it as a manager. And, it's going to be great. And he got there, and it was very clear there were certain guys he was friends with that he just wasn't going to do that to. Like he did bench Schwarber, and he benched Javi. And then when Wilson basically said the thing we all knew last year, which is all these guys think they're going to get traded. Nobody's playing hard, which was true. He did throw Javi in with him. He said, other than me and Javi. And Ross just got pissed and basically said, it's like, all right, what are you here for then? If you were supposed to be the hard ass disciplinarian guy, you're not that. If the idea is you're here to help figure out who might be somewhat useful when this team ever gets good again, you can't be just running veterans out there just because. So he should be under no pressure that he's getting fired. But I think right now there has to be some concern that maybe when this team gets good, you're going to realize. It's funny because Ozzie took some crap for saying that Tony La Russa was Rick Renteria with credentials.
Loved it.
David Ross is Rick Renteria.
Yeah, very much so.
There's no credentials anywhere.
Quaddy, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, he made the playoffs, and he does deserve credit, I think, for the way they started in the pandemic year. I mean, a lot of teams were like the Brewers didn't seem to remember if a baseball was inflated or stuffed or whatever, and the Cubs roared out and went 13-3, and then they weren't very good after that. But in a 60-game season, 13-3 was easily enough to get them in the playoffs. Yeah. And then they haven't been any good since. So even when they were supposedly trying to win.
it seems to me that, and I agree with you that there have been some head scratchers decision wise, whether it's roster construction or lineup construction, I should say, or some of the moves he's made in game. And I'll be curious to see if he's still here when the Cubs are somewhat better. If in fact, when you make an odd move or an unusual move on a really bad team, all your moves are going to usually blow up because your team's bad.
Yeah.
So there are other managers who get credit for being good managers who also do unconventional things from time to time. It just tends to go better. Like if the Yankees want to do some unconventional things the week after the All-Star break, they'll probably still win all their games because they're better than everyone.
Yep.
But that'll be sort of where the rubber hits the road on that. I just don't know if he's going to still be there by the time they're good, because what I think often happens is that even if it's not your fault, teams don't typically keep a manager for 3 or 4 90+ loss seasons. It just sort of how that works. It just doesn't happen. And this is going to be, it's 90 some games last year. Oh, and by the way, the whole point of losing all those games was for this draft that we're having tonight, right? That's the whole reason. There's nothing else about that that's helpful, right? Except for that. And then they're going to lose close to 100 games potentially this year, but certainly at least 90 again. And then next year, maybe they won't lose 90, but it doesn't seem like they're going to finish over 500 unless some dramatic things happen. So he's going to be going on a stretch of 3 years probably of losing seasons. And I don't know. Typically, those guys get fired even if it's not their fault. Ask Rick Renteria how that goes.
Yep.
So we'll see if he ever gets a chance to have a full roster.
I mean, Rick had his team trending up.
Yeah.
And it was just because, there's a future Hall of Fame manager who's now unexpectedly available. Yeah. So Jed is going to ring your doorbell.
Yeah.
Literally.
Pretty much. The Grim Reaper. And then it happened to him again with the White Sox. So poor guy, right? Yeah. He did what he was told to do. But yeah, we'll see. You think Ross is around the next time the Cubs are good?
Oh, it's so far from now.
Yeah, I mean that's the point, right? I mean, if we somehow could be convinced that was going to be 2 years from now, then I would say, yeah, he'll still be around. I mean, they extended him when they didn't need to. He wasn't in the last year of his contract. I can't imagine there are teams banging the door down to try to get him.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many weird things. There's Jed refusing to call it a rebuild. And he supposedly he does it because when let's be honest, when Theo took over and brought Jed with, not when him and Theo took over, that they felt like Hendry had left the cupboard so bare they didn't have anything to work with. And when he took over, he didn't want that to be a slap at Theo because the cupboard was not bare. It's like, just get over the semantics then. Just, basically all we want to know, he's unintended. He's making it weird by jumping through, these rhetorical hoops. Basically what we want to know is, are you going to try to win this year or next? If not, call it a rebuild. It doesn't have anything to do with what was there when you showed up. It's what are your plans? And by refusing to call it that, then there are expectations from people. It's like, all right, well, you already seen it. There's people like, well, they'll spend a lot of money next year in free agency.
Yeah, I mean,
what evidence do you have of that? They didn't do it. I mean, they kind of did it this year. Actually, when you look back now, it's like, why did they sign Marcus Stroman? I understand why Marcus signed. The literally was like minutes before the lockout, and the Cubs were like, "Hey, would you like $50 million guaranteed dollars, and you can become a free agent after 2 years? And all you got to do is take this physical." He's like, "Yeah, why wouldn't I do that?" But why did they want him for 2 years? Unless their plan, I always thought all along their plan was to trade him this year, because he would have, if he had somehow been healthy, then he would have had a lot of value because it would get him and another year. But their plan must be they're going to trade him next year. It was really weird.
Why did they think Andrelton Simmons for $5 million made sense, or $7 million, or whatever he's getting?
That never
or VR, any of these other moves. It's like,
Yeah.
remember when they got Anderson Simmons and people were, well, this doesn't mean they're out of the running for Correa at all. He could be the backup at $7 million. I'm like, backup? $7 million is more than any other position player is going to get on this team, except for, Contreras and Happ and Hayward if he's a starter. I mean, give me a break.
I mean, when they had good teams that just needed like some depth, they wouldn't spend that kind of money. They signed Daniel Descalso, and that was it, and acted like, oh, have you seen the guy's launch angle? He completely changed it. Like, yeah, well, then he gets to you and he cranks it up even more, so everything is a pop-up. So that's awesome.
Imagine in 2018 if they'd gone out and gotten a David Robertson, even as a setup man, just in case Brandon Morrow breaks down or whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, good goodness, it could have actually, God, could have been better. Anyway, I digress. Sorry, I digress.
No. I mean, really, let's take a look. We're at the All-Star break, so the Home Run Derby is a thing that's happening tomorrow.
Are the Cubs even allowed? They're not allowed in that, right? Because they don't hit home runs, I assume.
There was a push to get Patrick Wisdom in there.
Oh.
There was a push for it.
He used to hit home runs too, right? Until a couple weeks ago, right?
Pretty much. But I think Albert Pujols is allowed to play in it. That's the
whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a whole they gave him the special slot on the All-Star team. When they made the announcement, he was hitting 198. He had a little flurry of competence, and he got up to 216. I don't know what he's at right now. They may have benched him when he got to 216 just to make it look his numbers not look even more embarrassing. But it's like, well, that will really honor Albert. It's like, well, who's clamoring for this? Who are the fans that are like, you know what I'd like to see? Remember that guy who used to be good 6 years ago? That guy.
And then he went to the Angels, and I don't know what happened to him. I think he had swallowed by some sort of a tornado or storm out there, hurricane.
Yeah, you can make a little. You can make a little more of a case for Miguel Cabrera, but not much. He's really 3 homers and 32 RBIs or something.
That's why they have those old timer games, right?
Yeah. Why don't you make them? If the whole idea is just want to honor them, why aren't they like an honorary coach?
Yeah.
Because all you really want them to do is wave, right?
You want them to come out, get a thing. Yeah, that's it.
I think it would have been, honestly, what would have happened had Yachty been healthy? Would they have had to have flipped a coin over which overrated? I shouldn't say Albert is certainly not overrated. Yachty, yes. But would there have been? We know how much the Cardinal fans love Yachty, and he was never a trader, Trader, like Albert was, who left. I'm sure there've been a whole bunch of people who've been pissed if they'd have picked Albert over Yachty. Although the way Yachty was playing before he finally flew home to Puerto Rico for a few months, his OPS was sub Jason Hayward, so that's not a good.
Yeah, it's 519, I think, and also a negative WAR to go along with it. He's been a below average offensive player basically for 4 years now.
Yeah, he's been as irritating as it is that they make a big deal every time they re-sign him. It's like, it's not a bad thing for the Cubs. He's not good. He hasn't been good for a long time.
He's 1 or 2 years away from having a lower lifetime WAR than Jim Sundberg. So, keep it going, Yachty. That's all I say.
Well, as we are at the All-Star break, it's time to take a look at the race to the bottom, which is the goal of your Chicago Cubs, is to again get in this position next year, but in a even higher draft position. They want to get.
If the Cubs draft first next year, do you think they go underslot with a 5th round guy?
That's right.
Save up a ton of money for the 2nd round.
It's brilliant. It's a brilliant strategy. Don't question it.
Bad news though, they are further away from that first pick than you would think, because the race to the bottom is competitive.
They taught everybody how to do this, right? Everybody's had 6 years to learn how to tank. So, you can't just do it on the down low anymore.
And that was a costly rally today, right? Yes. They would have been a half game behind the Reds had they lost. Instead, the Reds have the worst record in the National League by a half game.
They do. The Reds are a half game worse, 34-57 to the Cubs, 35-57. The Oakland A's, 32-61.
Yeah, that'd be tough to catch.
And the Washington Nationals, 31-63, and trying to get Juan Soto off their roster. So that team is going to be really hard to catch.
So I was watching the end of the game today, David Robertson, and I had this mixed emotions. Like, on the one hand, isn't the Cubs' goal to lose this game? Isn't that what's in the best interest of the team long term, right? So should I be rooting for the Cubs to lose? But on the other hand, one of their few trade pieces who's not kind of having a terrible July is their closer. So don't I want him to close out a game against a good team because that'll help increase his trade value? It's really perplexing as to what to do. So I rooted for the Cubs to win, I guess, out of instinct, and they did.
So now they just need to get in the bottom three, right? Because the bottom three have the same odds.
Yep.
To win the lottery.
And then the league's going to give us a Patrick Ewing special, I hear. So,
Pittsburgh Penguins with Sidney Crosby type of. It makes a ton of sense that it's in the league's best interest. The Cubs do get that pick.
Throw us a Derrick Rose, right? Idea.
And it's not like the old days where they used to. The leagues alternated top pick, regardless. So and it happened, I don't remember off the top of my head. We talked about it on Remember This Crap podcast. But the Cubs picked second one year when they actually had the worst record in baseball, but it was the American League's turn to pick first. That's the way they used to do crap like this.
That couldn't possibly have worked out negatively for the Cubs, though, right?
No, it was like they missed out on, like, I forget. It was somebody good. Some multi-time MVP and Hall of Famer. I forget.
A generational talent.
They wouldn't have picked him anyway. They'd have taken Roy Smalley Jr. just for the hell of it. It's like, he's already on the team. Well, we're picking him again. That's how much we like him. And we're committed to him. We're going to pick him again today. It's like, you guys, you can't do that. That was back when the Cubs literally didn't have a scouting department. They had their old, like, ticket manager they made him the general manager. And they would, like, sit around in a room with a Street and Smith's college baseball guide and look at it and just randomly pick guys. So this is quite an organization that we've devoted our lives to rooting for.
And was that better or worse than the 2010 draft that I just recounted?
I got to give Jim Hendry credit. He bounced back in 2011. He'd been fired, and he had a better draft than he did in 2010 when he didn't. When he picked Javi and some of those other guys. Yeah, but that was bad. But you got to, when you get a chance to take an undersized pitcher who has mononucleosis and draft him like 3 rounds early, you can't pass that up. And that's what he did with Hayden Simpson.
And then follow that up with a bunch of because they underslotted him. So they followed it up with a bunch of guys who were also bad.
Right. So they got to overpay a bunch of bad players then. It's a perfect plan.
By the way, here's a quick trivia question for the two of you. Since the Cubs have now drafted a pitcher in the top 10 picks in the draft, which is something they don't often do. Do you know who the last pitcher the Cubs drafted with a top 10 pick was?
I know who it was.
Jeremy?
I don't. Andy, I'll let you.
It was Mark Pryor.
That's right. 2001.
Nice. 2001, Mark Pryor. Well, So as we're at the All-Star break, we can take a look at the week ahead for the Cubs as they resume play next weekend. They are in Philadelphia for 3 games, then come home for a fun 2-game homestand against Pittsburgh, and then 4 on the road in San Francisco, then 3 in St. Louis, and then the schedule starts to ease up.
Just as any good player they have has been traded.
Yes.
Then they look good. Yeah.
So by this point, this is the last chance to see potentially the last chance of as we run up to the deadline to see any of those potential trade chips. You mentioned Robertson. I went this week to say goodbye to Wilson Contreras, so I wanted to see him play one more time. It looks like Ian Happ is also someone being shopped around. There's looks like anybody who has any value whatsoever is being shopped around. Andy, how many as we come up on the trade deadline here? How many of these Cubs do you see them actually being able to move, and who gets stuck sticking with this Cubs team?
It's funny. The music stops and you haven't been traded. I was like, oh really? Do I have to stay? Do I have to share a locker with Jackson Frazier now? Is that how this works? Well, let's see. So Wilson Contreras got that hit today and then asked for the ball.
Yep. Right.
Do you think he either thinks he's being traded right after the All-Star break, or do you think he just thinks he won't get a hit in those 2 games against the Pirates?
I think he'll be traded. I think he thinks he'll be traded before the Pirates series starts a week from Monday.
I think he gets traded. I think he gets traded Wednesday.
I think
they would have traded him except for the Jeff Samardzija thing, and the Major League Baseball is like, no, you are not trading your All-Star right before the All-Star. We're not putting them in a weird witness protection program hat and making them awkwardly wave. He's going to play, and if he gets hurt, tough shit.
And you know what? It's such a late trade deadline too.
Yeah, it's August 2nd.
It's August 2nd, and it's a super late All-Star break. It's like because of the beginning of the season fiasco. So the fact that they're playing, that the All-Star game is going to be next week as opposed to earlier in the month, I think teams are going to be. This is usually around the time of year when everybody starts making their trades. So I'm with you. I think he'll be gone before that Philly series. I think. Happ and Robertson. It just depends on what they can get and when. But I think those guys will start peeling off, and then you'll end up getting the Smileys and others probably trade. Smiley's got to start next Sunday. Maybe after that, if he does all right, they'll trade him. Who knows? And
I would kind of think if you don't trade Wilson like right after the break, I think you have to tell Ross he can only DH.
Yep.
Teams know you proved he was healthy enough to catch by catching him over the weekend. Now it's he loves to tear hamstrings. He does it all. It's like his favorite hobby.
I've watched him do it in person.
Right. And so it's like, put him in, I would give him extra rest. And if you do have to play him, you should only DH him. So there's Wilson. Then they really need to hurry up and trade Dave Robertson. I mean, like post haste.
Yeah.
They've got such a great run out of him, but last year he was so unwanted that he pitched in the Olympics because no team wanted him. After the Olympics, the Rays signed him. The year before that, he caught Tommy John disease, and he had missed that year. So he's already pitched like twice as many innings as he had in the last 3 years. It's like you just need to get him out of there and get something back for him. I think teams are going to somebody's going to take Michael Givens. Somebody's going to take Chris Martin. I worry. I mean, as I know there are some fans who are attached to the guy and his coffee and all that other stuff. To me, the streakiness of Ian Happ and the fact that he's a good player, but he's not like a really good player. He's not a guy you're going to build your next great Cub team around. I would take advantage of the fact he's had a really good year, and I would trade him. I worry that they're going to keep him because they're like, oh, we can't trade everybody. No, the fans are going to be mad. It's like, that's the guy you keep then? No, he should go.
I'm with you. They're going to trade him. He's got a year. He also could get you a little bit more, actually, because he's got an extra year of control. Yeah. What are they waiting for, really? So that they can watch him get streaky in a bad way, and then next year trade him for less? I mean, if you're going to take this, I guess, nihilistic approach of getting rid of all your good players and trading them, well, then that's what you have to do. You can't just save one or two like that, because that doesn't do anything. That's just like, 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
I mean, I have to think they activated Steven Brault to try to pitch him enough over the next couple of weeks to see if they can get like somebody's 108th best prospect.
Yes. And
then, I don't know if will somebody give him something for Adrian Sampson? Like he's been like miraculously competent for them.
Yeah.
But they DFA'd him, right? And then the Mariners picked him up, and then the Mariners DFA'd him, and he came right back. Right. So I doubt there's any value there.
No. Does Patrick Wisdom does any of these contenders think a Patrick Wisdom bat in their lineup is what they're missing from making a run?
Well, I mean, I would think that probably not for what the Cubs would like to get back for him, but wouldn't you think because he can play third, he can play first, he can play the corner outfield spots. Jim DeShays likes to say we play shortstop half the game because of the way they line up defensively. It's like, we've seen him try to make those plays. That doesn't work. But he's not really an everyday major league player, not on a good team. But I would think he'd be like a useful utility player. The problem is you don't get anything for those guys. So there are a bunch of teams that'd be like, yeah, we'd love to have Patrick Wisdom, but we don't want to give you anything for him.
Right.
And I'm sure I know there's some Cub fans would be shocked to know that I don't think Frank Schwindel has a lot of trade value either.
That's
I
fair.
think that ship sailed. And even with Patrick Wisdom, he's, I don't know, people have been talking about how great a defensive third baseman he is, but none of the metrics suggest that. And whenever I watch him, it seems like he's doing something wrong. So it's small sample size for me, but still, I think, like he's got one home run this week, or this month. I'm sorry, one home run in July. Yeah. If he's not hitting home runs, his value really goes down. There's just nothing left.
Well, we head into – yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the few teams in baseball that he could play every day on, he's on. So, there's –
right. Fair enough.
But it would only teams that are like – it'd be nice to have that guy as like he's effectively like your 25th or 6th man on your team. He would be a luxury on a good team. He's a necessity on
like the way we used to treat Bodie when we thought Bodie was good, right? The kind of a utility bench player who could come in or pinch hit or play some third or maybe first or DH, whatever. Give you a little pop from the right hand side.
There's a guy that has 4 more years left in his contract.
Yes.
I think they are team options. They're not his option.
Right.
The one guy they assigned long term, and it ended up being David Bodie.
Was it going to be him or Schwarber? Do you think they chose wisely?
Yeah, I think they did a great job.
All right. Well, we're at the All-Star break. We're at time for today's podcast. That's enough. That's enough Cubs talk for us. We'll be back next week. We'll deep dive into all the picks. We'll see what happened in the draft. We'll talk about the All-Star game happenings and preview who's left, what trades have happened, and we'll have all kinds of roster news as we're speculating right now. So with that, we're going to call it a podcast. Andy, please remind all of our listeners where they can find your work on the internet.
Yeah, you can get anything you need, the newsletter, the podcast, whatever. Go to pointlessexercise.com.
Yeah, it's great stuff, and always a blast to have you on. Definitely appreciate it. Make sure you are following us on social media at Wrigleyville Nat for Twitter, same for Instagram, Facebook.com/Wrigleyville Nation. We have a TeePublic shop. Those links are pinned to all of our social media. You can also go to the website, WrigleyvilleNation.com. Click on store. You can buy yourself some merch. And we've also we've been able to be ad-free for our 4th straight season because of our support from our listeners at patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. Thank you to all of our patrons who continue to make it so that we don't have to do razor commercials or manscaping ads. So appreciate all of your support at patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Pat, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.